Here's something that still surprises me every time I say it out loud. India's Digital Personal Data Protection Act carries penalties of up to 250 crore rupees for a single category of failure. And yet, when I speak with compliance teams across the country, roughly 3 out of 4 tell me they have never once had their data practices formally audited. Not internally, not externally, never. Now think about that for a second. We are talking about the personal data of over 1 billion people sitting inside systems that nobody has ever independently checked. Would you fly on an aircraft that has never been inspected? Probably not. So why do we accept it for data? That is exactly why this playlist exists and why we begin right here at the foundations. So what will you walk away with? By the end of this chapter, you will understand why organizations actually need DPDP audits, not the textbook reason, but the real one. You will know the different types of audits and when each one fits. You will see how an internal auditor thinks differently from an external one and why both perspectives matter. You will learn the skills that separate a good DPDP auditor from someone just ticking boxes. And you will be able to define clear audit objectives and draw a scope that does not collapse the moment you walk into the first interview. All of that in this one chapter. Let us get started. So before we dive in, let me tell you what you have actually signed up for, because I want you to know exactly where this journey goes. Think of this playlist as walking alongside an auditor from the very first day of an engagement right through to the closing report. We start with foundations, what an audit is and why it matters under DPDP. Then we move into the legal baseline, because you cannot audit against a standard you do not understand. From there, planning. Then we audit governance, processing activities, consent, rights, security, vendors, breaches, and finally evidence, findings, reporting, and follow-up. Here is what makes this different. I am not going to read the act to you. You can do that yourself. Instead, I want to show you what happens when an auditor sits across the table from a marketing head who genuinely believes that a pre-ticked checkbox counts as consent. That conversation is where the learning lives. Let me give you an example. On one engagement, a client insisted their retention was compliant. Their policy said 3 years, clean, documented, approved. Then we pulled a sample from their backup system and found records from 2014. The policy was fine. Nobody had ever checked the backups. That gap between what is written and what is real, that is what auditing is about, and that is what we will practice together, chapter after chapter. Ready? Let us begin with why organizations need these audits at all. So let me ask you something. Why would any organization voluntarily invite someone in to find their problems? It sounds almost self-destructive, doesn't it? But here is the thing. The problems already exist. The audit does not create them. It just decides whether you find them or the Data Protection Board finds them for you. And trust me, one of those is considerably cheaper than the other. I remember working with a mid-sized fintech in Bengaluru. Their CEO told me quite confidently that they had no compliance gaps because they had never received a single complaint. And I said, that is not evidence of compliance. That is evidence that nobody has noticed yet. 3 weeks later, we found customer KYC documents sitting in an unsecured shared drive that 11 people had access to, including 2 who had left the company. Nobody had complained. The risk was enormous anyway. So the first reason is discovery. You cannot fix what you cannot see. The second reason is credibility. When a large enterprise client asks whether you are DPDP compliant, saying yes is easy. Proving it is not. An audit gives you something to point to. And the third reason, honestly the one I care about most, is culture. Once people know their work will be examined, they start doing it properly. Not out of fear, out of professionalism. So the audit is not the punishment. It is the practice run before the real test. Now, not every audit looks the same, and this is where I see beginners get tripped up. Someone says the word audit and everyone imagines the same thing, a stern person with a clipboard. But the reality is far more varied. Let me walk you through it. The first type is a compliance audit. This asks a simple question. Are you doing what the law requires? Straightforward, focused, and usually the starting point. Then there is a readiness assessment. This one comes before compliance is even expected. Think of it like a mock exam. You are not being graded, you are finding out where you stand while there is still time to improve. Third, a process audit. Here we are not asking whether the policy exists. We are asking whether the process actually works when a real customer submits a real request on a real Tuesday afternoon. Fourth, a vendor or third-party audit. Because your data does not stop at your boundary, and neither does your liability. And fifth, the significant data fiduciary audit. This one is mandated. independent, and it is not optional if you have been notified. Here is a story. A healthcare client asked me for a compliance audit. 2 hours in, I stopped and said, "You are not ready for this. What you need is a readiness assessment." They were about to fail a test they had never studied for. Choosing the right type is half the battle. So here's a question worth sitting with. If two auditors examine the same organization on the same day using the same criteria, will they see the same things? Honestly, probably not. And that is not a flaw. That is the point. Let me explain. An internal auditor knows the terrain. They know that the marketing team has been asking for a consent management tool for 18 months and finance keeps saying no. They know which manager will stonewall and which one will tell you everything over a cup of chai. That context is gold. It lets them ask sharper questions. But context cuts both ways. I once had an internal auditor tell me, "Oh, that system is fine, I helped build it." And I thought, well, that is precisely the problem. An external auditor walks in with no history, no friendships, no assumptions. They will ask the naive question that everyone internally stopped asking years ago. Why do we collect date of birth on this form? And the room goes quiet, because nobody actually knows anymore. I saw this play out at a telecom client. Internal audit had signed off on their retention practice 3 years running. An external reviewer asked one question in 20 minutes and found the whole thing rested on an assumption nobody had verified. So which is better? Neither. You need both. Depth from the inside, distance from the outside. Now let me be honest with you about something. When people ask me what makes a great DPDP auditor, they expect me to say legal knowledge. And yes, you need it, but it is nowhere near the top of my list. Do you know what is? Listening. Genuinely listening. Here is why. Most audit findings do not come from documents. They come from a pause. Someone answers your question a little too quickly or a little too carefully, and something in their tone tells you there is more. If you are busy planning your next question, you miss it entirely. I worked with a young auditor once, brilliant technically, knew the act cold, but she talked through every silence. And she kept missing things that a quieter colleague found in half the time. Second skill, curiosity without accusation. There is a way to ask, why do you do it this way, that opens a door, and a way that slams it shut. Same words, completely different outcome. Third, technical literacy. You do not need to write code. But if someone says the data is encrypted, you should be able to ask, encrypted where? At rest? In transit? Who holds the keys? And fourth, writing. Because an insight nobody can understand is not an insight. It is just a note. Knowledge gets you in the room. These skills get you the truth. So we have talked about who audits and how they think. Now let us talk about the thing that quietly decides whether your audit succeeds or fails before you even start. The objective. Let me put it plainly. An audit without a clear objective is just a very expensive conversation. Here is what I mean. Imagine someone tells you, go audit our DPDP compliance. Sounds reasonable, right? But what does that actually mean? Are we checking whether policies exist, whether they are followed, whether they are adequate? Those are 3 completely different engagements with 3 completely different amounts of work. I made this mistake early in my career. A client asked me to audit their consent practices. I said sure. 6 weeks later, we were still arguing about whether legacy customers from before the platform migration were in scope. We had never agreed on the objective, so we had never agreed on the boundary. A good objective is specific enough that you know when you are done. Something like, determine whether consent obtained through our mobile application meets the notice and withdrawal requirements of the Act for customers onboarded after January this year. Now that you can actually finish. And here is a test I use. Can you write the objective in 1 sentence, and can the client repeat it back to you? If not, you are not ready to start, because objectives shape everything that follows, especially scope, which is exactly where we are heading next. So if the objective is what you are trying to find out, the scope is where you are allowed to look, and this is where audits quietly go to die. Let me tell you about the worst scope creep I have ever witnessed. A client asked for an audit of their customer database. Simple enough. Then, well, obviously, that includes the CRM, and the CRM feeds the marketing platform, so that too. And marketing exports to a spreadsheet that sits on somebody's laptop, and that laptop backs up to a personal cloud account. 4 weeks in, we were auditing an entire organization on a 2-week budget. So how do you prevent that? You get specific and you get it in writing. Which systems, which processes, which locations, which time period, which data categories, and crucially, what is explicitly out. That last part matters more than people realize. Writing down what is out of scope is not admitting defeat. It is protecting the integrity of what is in scope, because a shallow look at everything is worth less than a proper look at something. But let me add a caution: do not let scope become a hiding place. If a client is desperate to keep one system out, ask yourself why. Sometimes the boundary tells you more than the audit does. Scope is a promise. Make it carefully, then keep it. Alright, let us step back and look at the whole machine, because I think you will find it more logical than you expect. Every DPDP audit, regardless of size, moves through the same 5 stages, and once you see the pattern, you will see it everywhere. Stage 1, plan. You define the objective, set the scope, assess risk, and decide where to spend your limited attention. Stage 2, understand. You learn how the organization actually works, not the org chart version, the real version. Stage 3, test. You gather evidence, you interview, you review documents, you sample, you trace data from the moment it enters to the moment it leaves. Stage 4, evaluate and report. You take what you found and turn it into findings that someone can act on. Stage 5, follow up. Because a finding that never gets fixed was just a nicely worded complaint. Here is what I want you to notice. Most people think testing is the audit. It is not. Testing is maybe 30%. The planning and understanding stages are what make the testing worth anything. I once watched a team skip straight to testing. They pulled samples from a system that turned out to be decommissioned. 2 weeks, wasted, because they never asked the boring question first. The framework is not bureaucracy. It is what stops you from wasting your own time. So, let us take a breath and look back at what we have covered. We started by asking why organizations need DPDP audits at all, and I hope I convinced you that the answer is not fear of penalties. It is discovery, credibility, and culture. We looked at the different types of audits, from readiness assessments to mandated significant data fiduciary reviews, and why picking the wrong one wastes everyone's time. We compared internal and external perspectives and found that you genuinely need both. We talked about the skills that matter, and I stand by what I said: listening beats legal knowledge more often than people admit. And we ended with objectives and scope, the 2 things that quietly determine whether your audit succeeds before you even begin. Here is what I want you to carry forward. An audit is not an inspection. It is an act of curiosity done rigorously. Now, if you would like a more structured deep dive on this subject, with role plays, quizzes, practice tests, and downloadable toolkits, our full Udemy course link is right there in the description below. It goes considerably deeper than we can here, and if you are finding this useful, do subscribe to the channel. It genuinely helps. You will also find the playlist link in the description. Click on it and you will get the complete list of every video in this masterclass, in order so you never lose your place. See you in the next chapter, where we get into the legal baseline. It is more interesting than it sounds, I promise.